Aesthetic or art styles are typically the first impression you'll have of a game, and often give you an idea of what to expect from the gameplay or story as a result. If you start up a game with a 2D retro art style, you're probably going to expect something different to what you might expect of a 3D realistically rendered one. So much so that these different presentations are often considered part of a genre rather than just an artistic style. While these differing styles can vary greatly, I'd rather look at the way, even in similarly presented games, the visual design of the game, or even the UI, can set that game apart from the others in its field. To do this, and to keep the length of this discussion manageable, I'm going to split this one up into two videos. This one will cover the aesthetic in AAA games, and the second, aesthetic in indie games. To narrow the field a little, I'm going to restrict my discussion to 3D AAA titles in this video. So this one won't offer deep or comprehensive analysis, but rather just a quick look at some of the aesthetics games have gone for that I found to be particularly noteworthy. First of all, these videos will be far from comprehensive, and I'm even missing out on the game with my absolute favourite visual style, because The Music Machine is a 3D indie title, but also for the fact that I've already talked about that game here. I also miss out on the wonderful Life is Strange, because it doesn't fit neatly into the indie or AAA labels. Suffice to say, both of these games are absolutely beautiful, and I think they're well worth checking out if you have the chance. But for the sakes of this video, I want to briefly begin by talking about the Mass Effect series. Sure, I could talk about the lens flares, the lighting, or the character design here, but I want to start with the Mass Effect series in order to talk about the UI and the colour schemes that accompany each game. What I'm getting at here is that there's a specific two-colour design employed in the UI for each game. The ever-popular blue and orange in the first, orange and green in the second, and red and blue for the third. A deliberate choice has been made in each game to separate it from the others in the series, with as simple a change as the colour scheme for the UI. This is of course a very shallow look at the series and its use of colour. There's far more that could be said about the series here.
Has Leon always been so blue?
But many other games use colour to better effect in order to create a unique identity for the game. Perhaps no AAA game has done so as successfully as Mirror's Edge. Mirror's Edge boasted bright, vibrant splashes of colour in an otherwise very clean, white world, and even today it looks fantastic for its bold aesthetic. In its time, however, it was all the more stunning. Rather than attempting for a gritty realism that left games desaturated and brown, the game was instead inspired by the likes of Piet Mondrian's paintings and clean modern architecture, sources of inspiration that remain largely untapped by the industry at large. As an aside, the clean look with splashes of colour was also done wonderfully by the Portal series, but that's been discussed at great length in a great many videos, so I won't rehash the praise the series receives here. The real reason Mirror's Edge's use of colour is so successful, however, is not just because it looks great, but because it also becomes so much easier for the game to guide you at speed, and as such supports the gameplay wonderfully. This is done partially through the blocks of colour that adorn many buildings, but mainly through the use of runner vision, highlighting key parts of the environment in red as you speed past them. The world and its visual design isn't cluttered or complex, but rather simple, which works wonderfully for a game all about speed and momentum. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are the cluttered, dirty worlds from Alien Isolation or Deus Ex Human Revolution that are far from clean or organised. For the sake of brevity, I'll only discuss Human Revolution here, but the effect of such a cluttered and sometimes claustrophobic visual design is conducive to the particular story that both games go for. Human Revolution's conspiracy is supposed to feel intricate, the characters within it interacting in complex ways, and the feeling of each major hub, although different in each instance, is supposed to evoke a particular atmosphere of having been lived in. This isn't a clean, sanitized world like the one presented in Mirror's Edge, but a dark and sometimes oppressive near future with a set of major social issues that you delve into. This time, it's not primarily the gameplay that is supported by the visuals, but rather the plot and the particular mood in each area. Finally, I'd like to discuss the unfortunately underused cel shading that in my opinion makes for some of the most striking visuals amongst all of the AAA 3D titles I've come across. The Borderlands series is a great example. Its colours pop, and the crisp outlines around characters and facial features give the game an appealing quality that most games avoid in striving for a sort of realism. It also melds with and enhances the humour that the series goes for, and although that humour often isn't my taste, Because the visuals are so engaging, it's easy to overlook the jokes that fall flat. Another example, although less iconic now than it might once have been given the release of Overwatch, is TF2. Not only did its visual style stand out from the crowd of first-person shooters, but its aesthetic also set it apart in terms of its approach to multiplayer games as well. Nothing about the game felt serious when I first played it, and the visuals matched this humorous, light-hearted vibe wonderfully, evoking the sort of bizarre universe of a Saturday morning cartoon, all the while boasting a mechanical depth that appealed to the hardcore audience. The visuals in-game are of course the most obvious aspect of the aesthetic the game goes for, but it also continues outside of the game into comics and, most brilliantly, the animated shorts that served as advertising for the game and each of its classes. Aside from just being a clever way of identifying the game as different from the other multiplayer games of the time, it also reimagined the way a game could both advertise itself and eventually the way it could make money after it went free to play off the back of the cosmetic items introduced into the game. The so-called hat economy was a far more clever addition than some people give it credit for. Not only did it retain player interest in the game, but it also identified a sort of competitive behaviour that most games don't concern themselves with. The sort of status that particular cosmetics may grant you. They may not give you any advantage mechanically, but cosmetic items like this do give you some kind of social advantage, making them very desirable despite being essentially worthless. I could talk about TF2 all day, but it will be suffice to say that the particular aesthetic the game goes for is the reason I first played it at all. That's how powerful an aesthetic decision can be. Ultimately, I don't think AAA games need to advertise themselves through their aesthetic so much as differentiate themselves from other games on the market. That's not the case for indie titles, however. Where a AAA developer can afford to spend thousands on marketing, an indie developer can usually spare very little, especially if they haven't already made a name for themselves. As such, the aesthetics of an indie title are often more than just a point of difference, but something of vital importance if the game is going to have any chance at succeeding. So that's what I'll look at in the second half of this discussion. The aesthetics of indie games. But until then, let me know what makes for a good looking game in your eyes. How important is colour? How important are polygon counts or lighting? Let me know in the comments below. Cheers, have a good one.